I never thought the scars on my face would stop me from holding a baby, but my brother's wife made sure everyone in that room knew I was too disgusting to touch her child. She looked me dead in the eyes in front of 30 people and said my face would give him nightmares. My own brother stood there and agreed with her. I walked out of that party with tears streaming down my face, but by the time I got to my car, something inside me had shifted. I went home, opened my laptop, and started digging. What I found about my perfect sister-in-law made my blood run cold. That beautiful woman wasn't just cruel, she was a professional con artist, and my brother was about to lose everything. But she made one critical mistake: she underestimated the ugly sister. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let me know where you're listening from in the comments. My name is Clarity. I'm 29 years old and I've lived with burn scars on the left side of my face and neck since I was 7. A pot of boiling water, a slippery kitchen floor, and one terrible moment changed my life forever. I spent 22 years learning to live with the stares, the whispers, the way people's eyes slide away from mine when they talk to me. Some days are harder than others, but I built a good life for myself. I'm a graphic designer, I work from home, I have my own apartment and a small circle of friends who see past the scars. I've even dated, though I'll admit my self-esteem isn't always what it should be. But I've learned to survive. I've learned to be strong. And through everything, I always had my brother Montgomery. He's 2 years older than me, and growing up, he was my protector. When kids made fun of me in school, Montgomery was the one who stood up to them. When I cried about my reflection in the mirror, he was the one who told me I was the toughest person he knew. We had weekly movie nights all through high school and college. We had inside jokes that made us laugh until we couldn't breathe. He called me at least twice a week just to check in. Montgomery was my person, my safe place, my proof that I was worthy of unconditional love. But when he met Reverie 2 years ago, everything started to change. I remember the first time I met her. It was at a family dinner 18 months ago, and Montgomery brought her without much warning. She walked into my parents' house like she owned it, stunning in a way that made everyone stop and stare. 28 years old, with the kind of beauty you see on Instagram, all perfect makeup and designer clothes. She worked in consulting, she said, though she was always vague about the details. My parents were charmed immediately. My mom kept saying how lucky Montgomery was. My dad couldn't stop smiling. I wanted to like her. I really did. But there was something in the way she looked at me that made my skin crawl. During dinner, she gave me what I now recognize as a backhanded compliment. "Oh, you're so brave to wear your hair up like that," she said, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. I could never be that confident. Later, when my mom mentioned my graphic design work, Reverie said, "Oh, you work from home. That must be nice, not having to worry about client-facing work." Montgomery laughed nervously. I told myself I was being too sensitive. Maybe I was reading too much into it. But it only got worse. They got engaged after 6 months. Married 8 months later. I wasn't asked to be a bridesmaid. When I brought it up to Montgomery, trying to keep my voice light, he said Reverie wanted her bridesmaids to match aesthetically for the photos. I wasn't invited to the bachelorette party either. Montgomery said she barely knew me yet, that I should give her time. I swallowed my hurt and tried to be understanding. The wedding day was one of the worst days of my life. I was seated at the back with distant relatives I barely knew, far from the family table. During the reception, Reverie wanted a photo with the pretty side of the family. She said it like a joke, laughing, but everyone knew what she meant. I wasn't in the picture. I left early, crying in my car in the parking lot, mascara running down my face. Montgomery texted me later asking why I left. He said Reverie was upset that I didn't stay for the bouquet toss. I didn't respond. When Reverie announced her pregnancy 3 months ago, I tried to be happy for them. I really did. But immediately, new rules appeared. I couldn't come to doctor appointments, family only, Reverie said, though her friends were apparently allowed. I wasn't invited to help plan the baby shower. I found out the gender through a group text. Montgomery's excuses evolved with each incident. Pregnancy hormones are intense, he said. She's just being mama bear. You know how hormonal women get. Even my parents enabled it. Just be patient with Reverie, dear, my mom said. This is her first baby. She's anxious. When baby Montgomery Jr. was born 2 months ago, I went to the hospital with flowers and a gift. Everyone got to hold him, my parents, my aunts, even family friends. Everyone except me. Reverie held that baby tight and said I don't want him getting upset. Babies can sense negativity. I stood there watching person after person hold my nephew while I was treated like I was contagious. When I tried to talk to Montgomery in the hallway, tried to ask him why she was treating me like this, he looked at me with exhausted eyes and said, "Can you please not make this about you? We just had a baby. Reverie is recovering. Stop being selfish." That word selfish, from my brother, my protector, the person who once told me I was the toughest person he knew. That's when I realized he had changed. Or maybe I never really knew him at all. Then came the baby shower. The 1-month celebration at my parents' house. Extended family was there, cousins I hadn't seen in years, family friends, everyone dressed up and bringing gifts. I had spent weeks creating a handmade baby blanket, pouring hours into every stitch, choosing colors I thought they'd love. When Reverie opened it in front of everyone, she held it up and said, "Oh, handmade. How crafty." The way she said it made it sound like an insult. A few people shifted uncomfortably. I had held myself together through months of small cruelties and casual humiliations. But I was determined to try one more time. I walked over to where Reverie was holding the baby and asked, as politely as I could, if I could hold my nephew. Just once. Just for a moment. "No," she said. Just like that. Flat and cold. "Absolutely not." The room went quiet. 30 people stopped talking and turned to look at us. "Why not?" I asked, my voice smaller than I wanted it to be. Reverie looked at me with something like disgust in her beautiful eyes. "Because you'll scare him. Look at yourself, Clarity. Babies are sensitive to frightening images. I won't traumatize my son just so you can feel included. Your face will give him nightmares." Complete silence. You could have heard a pin drop. 30 people staring at me, at her, at the baby. I felt like I couldn't breathe. And then Montgomery spoke. My brother. My protector. The person who was supposed to love me no matter what. "Rev, maybe that's a bit harsh," he said slowly. Then he paused and my heart broke. "But she does have a point about being careful. The baby does cry around new people." I grabbed my purse and walked out. I didn't say goodbye. I didn't look at anyone. I got in my car and I cried harder than I had cried since the day of the accident. I cried until I couldn't breathe, until my chest hurt, until there were no tears left. But then something shifted. The sadness turned into something else. Something sharper. Something that burned hotter than the scars on my face. Anger. And a desperate need to understand why. I went home that night and I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying everything in my head. Every cutting comment. Every exclusion. Every excuse. And that's when I started thinking about all the things that didn't quite add up about my perfect, beautiful sister-in-law. That's when I decided to find out exactly who Reverie really was. I couldn't eat for 3 days after that baby shower. Couldn't sleep either. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Reverie's disgusted face, heard her telling everyone I was too ugly to hold a baby. But what made it worse was the phone call from my mother 2 days later. She didn't call to check if I was okay. She called to tell me I needed to apologize to Reverie for making the party awkward by leaving. Then Montgomery texted Mom, said, "You stormed out. Really mature, sis." That's when something broke inside me. Or maybe something finally clicked into place. I was done being the victim. I was done crying. I sat up in bed at 2 in the morning and started making a list of everything I'd observed about Reverie over the past 18 months. And the more I wrote, the more I realized nothing about her actually made sense. She claimed to work in consulting, but I'd never heard her take a single work call. She wore designer everything, Chanel bags, Louboutin shoes, Cartier jewelry, but was supposedly between major projects. Her stories about her past never quite lined up. She said she grew up in Boston one time, then mentioned her childhood in Seattle another time. At the wedding, she had no family there. No close friends either. When I'd asked Montgomery about it back then, he said they were estranged, that it was a painful topic. Now I wondered if they simply didn't exist. As a graphic designer, I know how to research. I know how to track digital footprints and find information people don't want found. So that's exactly what I did. I started with her social media. Reverie's Instagram was perfectly curated, thousands of followers, beautiful photos, inspirational quotes. But it only went back 3 years. 3 years. I scrolled and scrolled, looking for anything from before that. College friends, childhood memories, old coworkers, nothing. It was like she didn't exist before 2022. I checked Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn. The same pattern everywhere. No history, no depth. Just a beautiful surface with nothing underneath. Her LinkedIn profile listed jobs at consulting firms I'd heard of. Impressive credentials. But when I started digging deeper, clicking through to the actual company pages, I couldn't find her name anywhere. Not in employee directories. Not in project credits. Not in any company announcements. The endorsements on her profile were generic, the kind you give someone you barely know. None of it was real. Then I did something that changed everything. I took one of her photos and ran it through a reverse image search. My hands were shaking as I waited for the results to load. And then there it was. The same photo but tagged with a different name. Sienna Vale, posted at a bar in Chicago 3 years ago. Chicago, the city where Montgomery met her. I clicked through to that profile. Sienna Vale had a different backstory entirely. Different job, different history, but the same face, the same woman. I kept searching and found another identity. Ree Morrison. Same face, different life story, different personality in the captions and posts. My brother hadn't married Reverie. He'd married a woman who'd had at least 3 different identities that I could find. Who was she? And what did she want? Then I remembered something Montgomery had mentioned a few months back. He'd seemed stressed, distracted. When I asked if everything was okay, he brushed it off but mentioned that Reverie was handling their finances now. She's better with money than me, he'd said. She went to business school. At the time, I hadn't thought much of it. Now it felt like an alarm bell ringing in my head. I called Montgomery and asked if we could meet for coffee. I needed to apologize properly, I told him. Make things right. He agreed, though his voice was cold. When we met, the tension was thick enough to cut. He barely looked at me, but I played it casual, apologized for leaving the party, asked about the baby. Slowly he warmed up. And then I asked, as casually as I could, how the savings for the new house were going. His face changed. Just for a second, something flickered in his eyes. Worry, maybe fear. Rev says we need to invest more aggressively, he said. She's moving money into international accounts for better returns. Offshore investing. She knows what she's doing. But he didn't sound convinced. He sounded like he was trying to convince himself. International accounts. Offshore. My brother's grandmother had died a year ago and left him $500,000. Where was that money now? I knew I couldn't ask Montgomery directly. He'd defend her. He'd shut me out. So I did something I'm not proud of. I reached out to Jake, one of Montgomery's colleagues at his financial firm. I told him I was planning a surprise for Montgomery's birthday and needed some insight into his stress levels at work. Jake and I had met a few times at company events. He was a nice guy, easy to talk to. What Jake told me made my blood run cold. Montgomery had been stressed for months. He'd asked Jake about tracking international wire transfers. He'd mentioned needing to take out a loan, which made no sense given the inheritance. He seemed confused about where money was going but didn't want to explain. I think he's embarrassed, Jake said. Like maybe he made some bad investments and doesn't want to admit it. But I knew it wasn't bad investments. It was Reverie. I spent the next week barely sleeping. I kept thinking about Montgomery, about that baby, about my brother losing everything. Finally, I made a decision. I used my savings money I'd been putting away for years and hired a private investigator. I gave him everything I had, the multiple identities, the suspicious financial behavior, the timeline of her relationship with Montgomery. And then I waited. The Pi called me a week later. You need to sit down for this, he said. The photos came through on my email while I was still on the phone with him. Reverie with another man, kissing him, walking into his apartment building, getting into his car, laughing with him at an expensive restaurant. The man was older, maybe 45, well-dressed, successful-looking. The Pi had identified him Marcus Devon, a wealthy investor. And according to the Pi's research, Marcus had no idea Reverie was married. She'd told him she was single, working on securing a large investment before they got serious. She was running the same con on 2 men at once. But it got worse. The Pi had pulled Montgomery's bank records, old statements my brother had left at our parents' house that I'd photographed when I helped Mom clean a few weeks earlier. The inheritance money was gone. $500,000, slowly drained over 8 months. First to $320,000, then to $180,000. The money had been transferred to offshore accounts in countries known for hiding assets. My brother had been systematically robbed by his own wife. And then the Pi found her history. Sienna Vale had been accused of fraud in Chicago 2 years ago. The charges were dropped due to insufficient evidence, but the accusations were there. A man claimed she'd stolen from him after a brief relationship. Ree Morrison had a restraining order from an ex-fiancé who said she'd drained his accounts. There were other names, other men, other accusations across 3 states. The pattern was always the same: meet a wealthy man, move fast, marry quickly, gain access to finances, drain the accounts and disappear. My brother wasn't just married to a cruel woman. He was married to a career criminal. And she was actively destroying his future while telling him she was building it. I sat in my apartment with file folders spread across my dining room table. Bank statements, photographs, background checks, evidence of fraud, documentation of her multiple identities, a timeline showing how she'd done this to at least 4 other men. Everything was there, organized and backed up in multiple locations. The baby's first birthday party was in 2 weeks. Everyone would be there: family, friends, Montgomery's colleagues. I called my lawyer friend and asked what I should do. She said Montgomery needed to see this first. He had to be the one to protect himself legally, to press charges, to freeze the accounts before Reverie could take everything and run. So I made a plan. I would show Montgomery everything privately before the party, give him time to process, to call his bank, to contact police. And then, when Reverie inevitably denied everything, when she tried to paint me as the jealous, bitter sister making things up, I would present the evidence publicly. Everyone would see who she really was. I spent those 2 weeks preparing, creating backup files, organizing evidence, practicing what I'd say. Part of me felt guilty. Was I doing this to save Montgomery or to get revenge for what she'd done to me? But then I'd remember her face at that baby shower, remember her calling me too ugly to hold my nephew. And I'd realize it didn't matter why I was doing it. What mattered was that it was the truth. My brother was in danger. His son was in danger. And I was the only one who could save them. The night before the party, I couldn't sleep at all. The party was even more elaborate than I expected. Reverie had gone all out: custom decorations, a professional photographer, a dessert table that looked like something from a magazine. She floated through the crowd in a designer dress, playing the perfect mother and wife. Everyone complimented her. Everyone told Montgomery how lucky he was. I watched her laugh and smile and touch people's arms like she genuinely cared about them, and I felt sick. When I walked in, the room went quiet for just a moment. I hadn't been invited, but I'd RSVP'd yes through my mother. Reverie's smile froze when she saw me. "Clarity," she said, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. "What a surprise. How brave of you to come." Then, quieter, so only I could hear, "Just don't go near the baby, please. I don't need him crying today." I smiled at her. In my purse was a thumb drive that would end her entire life as she knew it. "I wouldn't dream of it," I said. I waited until the party was in full swing, then asked Montgomery if we could talk privately. He looked annoyed but agreed. We went to his home office and I closed the door. My hands were shaking as I pulled out the first folder. "Before you say anything," I told him, "just look. Then you can decide if I'm crazy." I started with the bank statements. Watched his face as he recognized the accounts, saw the transfers he clearly hadn't authorized. "Do you recognize these transactions?" I asked. He tried to explain them away: investments, Reverie handling things, but his voice was uncertain. Then I showed him the offshore accounts. The missing $400,000. He went pale. "Where is it, Montgomery? Where's grandmother's money?" He couldn't answer. So I showed him the photographs. Reverie kissing another man, getting into his car, walking into his apartment. Image after image of my brother's wife living a completely separate life. Montgomery's hand started shaking. He tried to speak but nothing came out. Then I showed him the PI report. Her real identities. The fraud accusations. The pattern of targeting wealthy men, marrying them, stealing from them, and disappearing. The other victims who'd lost everything. "Her name isn't even Reverie," I said quietly. "She's done this before. To at least 4 other men. You're not her husband, Montgomery. You're her mark." He broke down. Actually broke down, crying right there in his office. "I thought I was going crazy," he whispered. "Money disappearing. Her being secretive about everything. But I trusted her. She's my wife. She's the mother of my child." He looked at me with devastated eyes. "What do I do?" I laid out the plan. Call the bank immediately. Freeze every account. Contact his lawyer. Call the police and have them on standby. Then we'd go back to the party, act normal, and when the moment was right, we'd confront her. She'd deny everything, I was certain of that. But he'd already have protected himself legally. Montgomery made the calls with shaking hands. I watched him secure his accounts, watched him speak to his lawyer in a hollow voice, watched my big brother's world fall apart. But I also watched him get stronger with each call, watched him realize he had to protect his son. We returned to the party. Reverie noticed something was off immediately. Her eyes narrowed when she saw Montgomery's face, but she kept performing. The cake-cutting ceremony began. Everyone gathered around, phones out, cameras ready. Reverie gave a speech about family and love and gratitude. She thanked Montgomery for being such an amazing provider. That's when my brother deviated from the script. Actually, he said, his voice cutting through the happy chatter, I need to ask my wife something. Reverie, can you explain some financial transactions I discovered today? The room went dead silent. Reverie's smile stayed frozen on her face, but her eyes turned cold. What are you talking about? Montgomery, this isn't the time. This is inappropriate. Where's the $180,000 from my grandmother's inheritance? He asked loudly. The money you moved to offshore accounts without telling me. People started murmuring. Reverie's mask was slipping. It's invested. We discussed this. Why are you humiliating me in front of everyone? That's when I stepped forward. Because you're a liar and a con artist, I said clearly. And it's time everyone knew the truth. The room exploded with shocked gasps. Reverie turned on me like a snake. You, she screamed. This is your fault. You jealous, bitter woman. You can't stand that I have everything you'll never have. A husband, a child, a beautiful life. You're so pathetic, you had to invent lies to destroy me. I pulled out my phone and connected it to their TV. Then explain these photos, I said calmly. Images filled the screen. Reverie with Marcus kissing him. Dozens of photos documenting her double life. Then the bank statements showing systematic theft. Then documents showing her real identity, Sienna Vale, Ree Morrison, and the fraud accusations that followed her across 3 states. Reverie's face drained of all color. She looked around wildly, desperate for someone to defend her. Those are fake. Clarity is obsessed with me. She's been stalking me, trying to destroy my marriage because she's jealous of my looks. I called the bank an hour ago, Montgomery said, his voice stronger now. The accounts are frozen. I know everything, Reverie. Or should I call you Sienna? Or Ree? He stepped closer to her. You called my sister too ugly to hold our son. You isolated her, humiliated her, made me choose between you and my family. But the worst part, his voice cracked, you never loved me. I was just another paycheck to you. Another mark in your con. He pointed to the door. Get out of my house. We're done. Reverie made one last desperate play. She grabbed the baby and ran for the door, screaming that she was taking her son. But the police were already outside, waiting. Montgomery had called them. They stopped her at the threshold, and her screaming turned hysterical as they explained she was being detained for questioning regarding multiple counts of fraud and identity theft. As they escorted her out in handcuffs, she locked eyes with me one last time. The beautiful mask was completely gone. What I saw underneath was pure hatred. This isn't over, she hissed. But it was. The investigation moved quickly. More victims came forward. She'd stolen over $1 million from various men over 6 years. Federal charges were filed. I testified in court, presented every piece of evidence I'd gathered. When the defense attorney tried to discredit me by asking if I had a personal vendetta against Reverie, I looked him straight in the eye and said yes. She called me too ugly to hold my nephew. But that's not why I'm here. I'm here because she's a criminal who nearly destroyed my brother's life. My feelings are irrelevant to the facts. She was sentenced to 8 years in prison, lost all parental rights. Montgomery got full custody of his son. 3 months after the trial, Montgomery came to my apartment. He stood at my door with tears in his eyes and said, I'm sorry. For everything. For choosing her cruelty over you. For letting her humiliate you. For not being the brother you deserved. We both cried. But we healed. Now Montgomery Jr. is 2 years old, and I see him every week. He calls me auntie and reaches for me when I walk in the room. My scars don't scare him. They never did. Reverie was wrong about so many things. But she was most wrong about this. Beauty isn't what you see on the outside. Real beauty is standing up for the people you love, even when it's hard. Even when it means tearing down someone else's perfect facade to reveal the ugly truth underneath. My face may carry scars, but hers carried something far worse, a rotten soul that no amount of makeup could hide. If this story touched you, please hit that subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. Drop a comment telling me where you're watching from, and share your own story of standing up to toxic family members. Sometimes we need to hear that we're not alone. Sometimes the person everyone else thinks is crazy is actually the only one brave enough to tell the truth. Thank you for listening to my story.